Ladies and gentlemen, I thank the Arshavidya Sangha for inviting me today. Mr. Malhotra, Professor Eberhart, and all the other distinguished guests. The topic that the Arshavidya Sangha chose for the discussion today is very apt. I think the Indian civilizational ethos is premised on diversity. The gods wanted creation to be diverse. That is why diversity prevailed and diversity prospered. In all life forms, as in on non-living structures, diversity is an essential facet of life. Any time the world or I think moved towards uniformity or any kind of an imposed homogeneity was always seen as an imbalance that needed to be corrected. That is why I think from the beginning in India all kinds of diversity in thought, in deed, in culture, in language, in religion were not only accepted, tolerated, but actively promoted. And that is why they have prospered. The interactions of religions is always a very interesting topic. I think in a historical context, I'm struck by what Professor Radhakrishnan, a former president of India and a scholar of Indian philosophy, wrote about the interaction during Adi Shankara's time between the Brahmanical tradition and the predominant Buddhism that prevailed all across India. Adi Shankara, Professor Radhakrishnan said, ensured that Brahmanism finished Buddhism with a fraternal embrace by taking on the best aspects of Buddhism into the Brahmanical traditions, including doing away with mindless ritual, bringing in the Mayavada into Advaita, and thereafter taking on Buddha as an avatar of Vishnu. In more recent times, I think a better understanding of how religions should coexist and prosper in our civilizational ethos was best articulated by Vivekananda and his spiritual master Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. I think a few months before Vivekananda passed away, he had spent some time at the Kher Bhavani temple in Kashmir, and during one of his spiritual phases, he bemoans in front of the Mother Goddess and says, Mother, why is it that we have not been able to save you from the marauders who destroyed this temple? If only I was there, I would have ensured that your temple would have been preserved in all its glory. And suddenly the Divine Mother appears to Swami Vivekananda and says, is it you who are protecting me, or is it I who am protecting you? And then the Mother Goddess says, this is my will and it shall happen. You don't worry about protecting me. And prior to that, it was Paramahamsa who actually in this day and age showed that all paths lead to the same God. I think it was his spiritual realization of reaching the same samadhi, the same eternal oneness and elimination of duality through Tantra, through his prayer to the Mother Goddess, through all yogic traditions, and eventually even through Islam and through Christianity, where he proclaimed that I have gone through each one of these paths and it has led me to the same non-dual reality of oneness. I think this is our tradition. We have always encouraged diversity. We have always celebrated diversity. This not only informs our spiritual and our religious ethic, it also informs our political philosophy, and it informs India as a free republic. May this discussion continue. I thank you for inviting me and look forward to hearing some of the good debates that happened today. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Excellency Harish Bharat, not only for taking the time and initiative to be here, but also addressing the issue of diversity of India's dharmic values. We have now arrived at the crucial juncture of today's events, the dialogue on interfaith interaction between Sri Rajiv Malhotra and Professor Christian Eberhart, moderated by Professor Bharat Srinivasan, the faculty advisor of Ashwidya Satsang.
The first question is, can Christianity and Hinduism coexist with mutual respect? Can it be possible to coexist? Because we have one religion saying, look, my own way is the highway, there is no other way. And so on this, I'll leave the floor. Mr. Professor Eberhart, I will ask you to respond to this first. You have the questions there also. They are appearing. And you can start putting your point of view. Thank you.
So, can Hinduism and Christianity coexist with mutual respect? I personally hope that, because that's exactly what we're doing at this department that I talked about already, so I'm not going to repeat this portion, but the idea is in fact that not only Hinduism and Christianity, but also Hinduism, Christianity, and all the other religions, as far as we can represent them, and there are of course limits, can coexist in peace. We are not disseminating knowledge for any malicious reason or so, but really to inform people about what needs to be known today. And religious systems, as I said earlier, because of various reasons, become more and more important. So there's actually a reason I think that we just need to also catch up on religious knowledge, which is why the University of Houston has this task of providing knowledge about religious traditions. I know that, of course, in the past, things haven't always been such that people just took their hands and danced in circles. And that was partially because there's pride on various traditions, and there was such a thing as modernity. Now, Rajiv has already addressed that. Modernism more precisely, is a way of thinking. It's a thought system, and I know that Rajiv likes to talk about thought systems, which holds that only one thing, one way of doing things can be legitimate or right. So, for instance, if 50 years ago you were born as a left-hander, you were taught differently in school. You had to write, okay, just put that away, but you had to write with your right hand, even though maybe you were a left-hander and whatever you did with your right hand was never as beautiful as somebody who was born this way. But there was only one way of writing properly. Of course, there was also only one way of having a gender. I mean, you had to be male, women were naturally considered inferior, and that continues pretty much until today. Well, in many countries, of course, there was only one legitimate nationality. Now, guess which nationality that could have been? Of course, typically the nationality of the country where you were. Well, I was from Germany, and so, back then, of course, people thought that Germany is better than the rest of the world. They even sang that in their national anthem. But now the national anthem has changed, and we have actually overcome this. There's now postmodernism, where people who are left-handed no longer have to learn how to write with their right hand. And we're trying to get to the equalities of genders and hopefully to a dialogue and an acknowledgement of the equal status of different nations, nationalities, also languages, and of course religions. So for me, every kind of mode, thinking mode within religion that thinks that only my religion is the absolute or the better one or so is actually simply outdated. I know that people thought that some time ago, but we've actually moved beyond that. There's a European Union where countries no longer fight over the borders. In fact, there aren't even borders anymore in Europe. You can just drive through the highway and you're from France into Germany, and from Germany into Denmark, let's say, and you'll only notice by the different signs, by the different language of the signs, that you're actually in a different country. So I hope that at some point something similar will be possible for religions, that there could be respect not just tolerance. Rajiv points it out in his book, and I think that's a very valuable distinction. Not just tolerance, which means you kind of just allow the others to coexist, no, but real respect. I would even take it further. Love for the others despite the otherness. Not only at the point where the others have started to conform to my own self in various aspects, but even as they're different. By the way, that's in the Bible. Already in the Torah, Leviticus 19, it says not only to love your neighbor, but love your enemy. Sorry, the foreigner, that's the word. Love the foreigner as yourself. Jesus will later also say love your enemy, by the way, but in Leviticus 19, love the foreigner. There's no demand that the foreigner, first of all, applies for a visa and ultimately becomes naturalized to your own nationality. No, love the foreigner as yourself. So I hope there is space and a time for this mutual dialogue and respect between different religions, and Hinduism and Christianity being part of that.
Rajiv,
I'd like to differentiate the position of the church from, say, the views of individuals, because we as individuals have certain views. Academic people generally very liberal, broad-minded, but what matters in the field out there, out in the trenches, is what it really counts. And in the trenches, you have evangelists aggressively using all kinds of means, hook or crook, to convert people, to kind of denigrate Hinduism. And when you talk to them, they're getting their funding from the Western side. A lot of the, Baptists, Southern Baptists, getting it from United States. Lutherans, very aggressive, getting from Germany. A lot of this going on. So what we are hearing is kind of almost a double talk, in the sense that you go to an interfaith dialogue and everybody loves each other, but the guy goes on a Sunday and gives in his sermon, he says those guys go to hell. So what do we believe? I mean, this is the problem of interfaith, is that people say one thing, but what goes on in the trenches is what matters. That is what matters, not a personal opinion of a person. But are Christians able to operationalize what Professor Eberhart said, which I fully agree with? Are Christian churches willing to send one of their policy statements saying, stop evangelizing, respect these people? And if they voluntarily want to convert, that's another matter, but don't go aggressively marketing against them. Don't do negative marketing, advertising that they are heathens and they are bad and they have a negative, this kind of a hate literature is so prevalent. I mean, I have an e-group where almost every day somebody gives some examples of it. So the evangelists are the bad cops and the interfaith guys playing the good cops. We have to be very careful not to get deceived. And the problem cannot be solved as long as the canon, which is a history-centric canon, cannot be amended. There's no amendment to it. And the canon says you got to expand your market share. That it's a market share expansion ideology. And almost it's as the history of like a franchise. So God is given a franchise to this group, and they have the exclusive franchise to go market God's love and all that. And so others have to be taken over by hook or crook, and if you do it nicely, it's better than if you are pressured into it. So I would say that what will be required to have mutual respect and harmony will be a reformation, a formal reformation of the same kind that happened in Germany once before, which was a reformation vis-a-vis the authority of the church and science and whatnot, which Luther led. But it seems that now that was a reformation which led to a kind of a ceasefire with science and so forth. It helped. But now we need a reformation with respect to non-Abrahamic religions being respected. And unless there's a canon, the canon itself, reformation, unless there is a policy statement from the church, then an individual here and there is just a good cop. And I feel that we need more good cops. But I always, when I meet a good cop, I say, okay, please go convince your church and let them issue a statement tomorrow. I don't have time for this, but I would love to, if I had time, to tell a story on Cornell University was going to organize this world conference where everybody was going to love each other and condemn condemn those who are bad guys. And what I told them is we should have a universal declaration which says that each of us will go back, because all the religious leaders are going to come, each of us will go back and we will stop anything which is negative against others. We will inform all our priests, all our preachers, not to say anything negative against others, and we'll uniformly declare that, and all of us will sign. And wherever in the text it says otherwise, we'll say that's deactivated. The conference never happened because I was one of the sponsors of that, and I put that as a condition. Otherwise, it's all double talk. We'll come and we'll say certain things, but nothing will change in real life unless we are really willing to go back and make that change. So that's what I would think will take to make the change real. Thank you.
Let's have a rejoinder to Rajiv.
Situation of the church, or the official declarations of the church, are in fact sometimes very different from maybe from the smooth talk. What I find is that the declarations of the church sometimes aren't a whole lot in line with where the religious traditions came from. I am surprised that sometimes people think that, for instance, Jesus was a missionary going out to evangelize people. In fact, if you read the Gospels, and the Gospels are just a story by 4 different people, by the way, they wrote their 4 different stories about what Jesus was doing. Jesus doesn't really go around a whole lot, and he doesn't even leave the boundaries of this little country, actually, of the Judean religion. And what he does is, he never really encounters an atheist and says, you should believe in God, for instance. I think a lot of people today think that, but Jesus doesn't. One reason is that everybody back then was so religious that an atheist basically didn't exist. That's a fairly modern, new concept. But Jesus, if you read the Gospels, he goes to people and basically tells them, don't take it that seriously. You got to be a bit more free about how you read these texts. Especially, do not use religious traditions in order to harm people or to kind of discriminate against them. And then you also heal people. So that's, by and large, the mission of Jesus. So I also know that many other founders of religions had actually a very much an open heart, and were typically very open for people from different traditions and stages of society, sometimes of genders, not always, but sometimes. But when religious traditions started to form, which means, when this charismatic bubble disappeared and structures had to be shaped, things suddenly started to look very different. So there's always a very strong change, unfortunately, between what you have in, say, the first half century or first century maybe, and then what happens second century onwards, which is really unfortunate. For me personally, the major divide and where problems exist is actually not between different religions, say Hinduism or Christians and Jews, or even Jews and others. It's more between those who want to do it very precisely and very much by the letter, and those who are actually much more freer and have this kind of open vision of what's out there. I could have added earlier when I did this talk on creation, that those who basically say, that you're a Hindu and therefore what you teach cannot be from God, that they actually have a pretty screwed vision or concept of creation, because if God created the entire world, that's not only wood or concrete, but people and everything there is. Why would, if God only say created Christianity, and not the Hindu tradition? Isn't that kind of saying that half of the world, or 2/3 of the world, with all the other religions, were not created by God? That's kind of a no-no. Nobody would ever assert that. But okay, Bad Cop is calling for time again. Somehow people seem to assume that.
Your time is out, sir.
Okay, thank you.
So, I think when you have a very organized religion like Christianity, very institutionalized religion, a very formal structure to it, then it's okay for some individuals to sort of say, okay, I have my own personal point of view. But take Germany, for example. The tax, I'm told that the tax people pay, a certain percent of that goes to the church in Germany. Yeah. So, while we think it's secular and all that, but in Germany, income tax paid by the citizen, a certain amount of that tax is mandatory, goes to the German church. So it's an institution, it's an official government supported financial institution, and it's armed. The Lutheran Church goes out and does various things. We cannot walk away from that. I mean, I'm sorry, but I would say that every person who is a Christian who thinks this way has a responsibility to go and fight petition. I don't see these petitions. I go to these interfaith dialogues and they keep talking very nice to us, but I say, okay, go back tomorrow, start a petition against that policy of your church. I will tell you exactly what it says and tell them to remove it. And they won't do that either. They will sort of kind of be complicit with that. So I think there is need for activism. The German church sent so many millions of dollars to India with all these activists to kind of hit at Hinduism. Why aren't there Christians of your point of view who are also activists against the church doing that, saying don't do that? Just like Americans were against the Vietnam War, there were Americans against a lot of American foreign policy. Why aren't there liberal Americans, Germans, British people who are actively anti-evangelism, anti-foreign evangelism? They should be fighting. Then I would believe it. I agree. You can reinterpret a faith many ways from what the founder said, and you can say the founder didn't mean this. But what we are experiencing as Hindus is the result of what Emperor Constantine started as a very formalized, institutionalized church, a theocracy effectively, and then the Vatican, and then the Holy Empire breaks up and Protestants come and different. What we are experiencing is a whole lineage, a whole history of institutional mechanisms that morph and turn into different mechanisms. And what we have today in 2014 as Christianity Inc. is actually a very formidable multinational with a total employment and sales force larger than any Fortune 50 company in terms, if you look at every priest as a salesperson. And if you look at every church as a retail office, it's more retailers than all these Walmart type people with retailing. So it's the world's largest multinational, and the amount of money it collects and the amount of real estate it owns and the amount of power it has, and it can topple governments and it's funded by governments. This is a formidable machinery and with a formidable history. So we cannot say that, some individuals don't believe in it. I think these individuals really need to stand up and fight their own church for another reformation.
So I think, Rajiv, I want to go to the next topic, but I think I'll just give a couple of minutes as a rejoinder to that, and then we go to the next topic.
So Rajiv is correct. Germany, in fact, has a church tax, which means that a portion of the taxes an individual pays goes to the church. But there's a good reason for that, because every state in Europe has a fairly strong social system, and the states simply know, all the states, that the churches actually contribute largely, hugely to this social service. And now the social sector is much more developed back in Europe. Churches play their part in that. And this is actually funded by the state in order to facilitate that. That's the main reason of it. Now that, of course, a church will also provide religious education is fairly clear, but it's, I think, mainly the social side and the educative arm of the church which is funded through this. Again, the churches are left at their discretion what they want to do with this money. I should say, on the other hand, you said Christianity is a fairly organized, well-organized institution. It sounds to me very much like when you say Christianity, you have the Catholic Church in mind, but you mentioned the Reformation yourself and said that Luther, we need another Reformation like Luther. With Luther, who started the Reformation in 1516, 1520 or so, this hugely organized church actually really started to tumble, not fall, but the institution suffered quite a bit, and something different evolved, and that's the churches of the Reformation, Protestant churches, the Lutheran Church, to which I belong. And things since then have been quite different. The Lutheran Church and many of the Protestant churches aren't that well organized at all. They're actually grassroots churches. Some of them have barely any superstructure. If you talk about these superstructures and the big bucks, that's definitely the Catholic Church with Pope Francis currently in Rome. By the way, they acknowledge and accept the Protestant churches as little as they accept other religions like Hinduism, believe it or not. there won't be any common Last Supper, for instance, kind of pinnacle ritual in Christianity between Catholics and Protestants. If you try that as a Catholic priest, you might as well be removed from the church roster. That's, by the way, what the last Pope did to a Catholic priest who was trying that at some point. So just be aware of that.
So, I think thank you. So we'll go to the next topic. This topic is basically about the theological interface between Hinduism and Christianity. In Christianity, if you have faith and you believe in Christ, you have salvation. And many times, this is also used as a method for salvation. Is used as a sort of instrument to even convert people. For example, it is quite common. It's quite common knowledge in India, though the Indian political establishment would not like to, go into that territory. That Mother Teresa used it as a huge mechanism to convert a lot of people to Christianity. So, on this, I will give the floor first to Rajiv and to make his points. Thank you.
So, in my book, Being Different, I've raised the theological differences between the two, and why, to preserve the integrity of Christian theology, the Nicene Creed, and things like that, which are very standard across, whether it's Catholic, Protestant, they may have nuanced differences, but they all have this common denominator. Why that theology and the DNA of that theology is exclusivist, because you can say we think Christ is in your heart, and this is the Christ chakra, and the Christian yoga teachers will say, and Christ is everywhere, and Christ is Brahman, and Christ means the same as Krishna. In fact, some will say that Krishna is a distorted word for Christ. Some people saying like that. So, and a lot of people get kind of swayed into it, thinking like, wow, this is one of our, and Jesus lived in India, is one of the yogis anyway, he's the first yogi, So we get kind of duped into that. The issue is not only the institution of power, like in the first question I mentioned that point, the institution of power is very strong. By the way, Lutherans in India are very strong. Lutherans in India, I have done a whole lot on the Lutherans in India. They are at the frontiers of this Dalit movement, Dalitism, Dalit Freedom Network. They are into that in a big way. So that particular church is a very powerful church in terms of what is going on in India. But leaving the institution aside, as far as theology is concerned, I would say that the Christian theology will need major rethinking, major changes and editing in order to make it honestly and genuinely able to accept others as legitimate. Because you're talking about there's this idea of heaven. In the question we say, can others have a place in heaven? Is there a place for unbelievers in heaven? So even the concept of heaven itself you have to deal with. I was in the Mormon church and they were giving me this tour, and they were telling me all about heaven and you can come and we'll be in heaven. It's almost sounded like it's some kind of a retirement community. And I was asking questions like, do you have golf in heaven? Because I said, if you don't have golf, why would I go there? So this lady, she was Korean, she went and asked somebody to see if this guy would be able to play golf. And he answered my question. And then I said, do you have Godiva chocolates? Because if you don't have Godiva chocolates, I don't want to go to heaven. And they took all these questions very seriously. Like, is it literally a place? And this guy is he's ready to sign up, but he needs all these details, So, the idea of heaven itself, we have a problem with. And this idea of salvation is not moksha. And a lot of our priests also are confused. Our priests, because we've been colonized, so they keep saying this is Hindu salvation. We don't have salvation because salvation is from sin. There is sin from which you want salvation, and the idea of Hindu the original sin we don't have. So the Christian good news is that Jesus has come to save you from sin. And the Hindu good news is that there is no original sin, we are originally divine. So if the nature of the self is Satchitanand, then where is the original sin? I'm Satchitanand. It's ignorance, is a different matter. I'm ignorant of it and I have to recover that. So my moksha is to recover what I already am and I have forgotten. And it's not that I have to be salvaged from sin, and my original character is ultimately my original character is sin, and I have to get rid of sin. So the concept of salvation is itself, the idea of can Hindus have salvation and can we go to heaven, I think we should not even frame it like that. Because I as a Hindu, cannot accept the idea of original sin and hence cannot accept salvation. I cannot accept some retirement community where I go and we had the front have a golf course view or something like that. I'm sorry, the whole metaphysics and cosmology of Christianity is such that at best we could have a truce and say, okay, we're very different from each other. We're not going to try and convince and convert each other. At least let's put a moratorium. Let's put the Dalai Lama in the year 2000 proposed something, that all the world religions should put a 25-year moratorium against any evangelism and conversion of other people. And imagine how the world would have been different today if people had accepted it. Hindus had no problem, said fantastic idea. Hindus, Buddhists, Dharma people said, okay, we are not interested in converting others. But the Jews actually accepted that because they're not converting. But Christians and Muslims would not accept this moratorium against conversion. So I see that the huge machinery of conversion that's going on and the theology that backs it, and they keep saying this is the Christian good news, even though Jesus may not have said it, but it's the Christian good news. Jesus did say, spread the good news. He did say at least my friends tell me that Jesus said, spread the good news. But what is meant by good news? Who defines what is meant by good news? Well, the interpretation of evangelists is that good news means that we got the exclusive franchise to take over. So that's the issue I have.
Thank you, Rajiv. You got 4 minutes, sir.
Okay. Well, I admit that I have a very different perception of heaven. My question would be, is there mango lassi being served in heaven? Otherwise, I wouldn't go there. You don't know what mango lassi is?
Mango lassi.
My favorite beverage. Okay, they should also play tennis and not golf. Who cares about golf? I'm a tennis player. But spread the good news. You talked about the Reformation. There was a mighty thing at stake in the Reformation. What was actually the thing that just bubbled over back then and that Martin Luther could no longer take? It was that the Roman Catholic Church, I'm coming back to this distinction between the Catholic Church and Protestants, the Roman Catholic Church in fact sold forgiveness of sins. That's something which I had to teach my students this semester. Many don't believe it today, but the church sold indulgences for a lot of money. By the way, that was a fundraiser. They built a big cathedral in Rome, and they needed money for that, and so they actually came up with preachers preaching terrible things, especially about sin, and then people would in fact go and buy letters, a piece of paper, and it said that your sins were forgiven, but you had to give money for that. And Luther said, no, if I read my Bible, actually that's not how it goes. Forgiveness is free. Now, spread the good news. Once actually, if you read what Paul writes, what is actually this good news? It is in fact, and there you're right, Christians have a notion of sin. How do we explain all the bad things that happen? I would like to live on with a notion of without sin because it's not pleasant. But I need to acknowledge that bad things happen, and that's what falls into the category of sin for Christians. I know there are different ways of explaining that, but this is one way of explaining it. The amazing thing, the good news that should be spread is that the relationship between God and humans is not taunted by this. It's still intact, even though we're all sinners. One of the main principles that the Protestant Church developed was, again Latin, simul justus et peccator. And in English that means you are at the same time, I started at the beginning, you are a sinner, but at the same time you're justified. Does it make sense? Well, it means actually, yes, you are a sinner, but in the end it doesn't matter, because you are a child of God no matter what happens. And Christ is not there to judge you, Christ is there to save you. That's actually the news that the Reformation, and before Reformation, St. Paul proclaimed. So there is a notion of sin, but that doesn't mean that you have to pay for it or do all sorts of things. The core of the Christian gospel is exactly this, that forgiveness of sins is possible and it's free of charge. And that's what Paul writes in Romans 3, for instance. So a letter written to the congregation in Rome in chapter 3, that is free of charge, and nobody could possibly charge any money for that. I think that's very important to realize. As a corollary of that, humans are holy, therefore. Luther introduced the notion of the priesthood of all believers and of the sanctification of all, and that means that it doesn't depend on our incredible actions whether we are holy in front of God. Now, I know we all are hard workers. I work hard in my job. Rajiv works very hard for his institutions. We all like to bring things to God, so we would actually like to be acknowledged by God for what we bring. That's all very good. But our sanctification, that's the Christian, at least my belief, the sanctification of myself and everybody else doesn't depend on what we bring to God. That's where the Protestant Church, in fact, caused quite a bit of confusion in this orderly system of belief of the Catholic Church, that things were turned upside down and that sanctification is there for everybody. Everybody counts as holy. And the task then is to still live an orderly life. But it's no longer this kind of marketplace where you actually have to buy your sins away.
That's about it. Thank you. You want to give a rejoinder, sir?
There is suffering and there are bad things happening in the world, but there's different theories of explaining it. And original sin and then the evil and devil is a theory. But in our tradition, we have karma as a theory. So you see that the issue is in this book being different. I explained that irreconcilability of the two. One is this substitutional atonement. The Son comes and He substitutes for your suffering, so He will suffer for you, and this kind of a thing. And this whole idea, so that is how Jesus is there. Otherwise, if there were self-correcting sin, if I like karma, you could just work your way out. You pay the phala, and and your reincarnation, you keep on going. It's not that there's a heaven with a golf course, but you just keep on going until you've achieved moksha, liberation from this condition. So the whole metaphysics of reincarnation and karma is very different. And to accept that, I know on a casual level, 15-20% of the Americans believe in karma or something like that. They do that. But then if you really tell them what is at stake that they have to give up. When you do a real focus group and you educate those people and say, if you accept this theory of karma, reincarnation, and the whole idea, the whole focus on the nature of the body and why you should bury it and not cremate it because this body will be resurrected and you should be in your family next to your loved one buried there, and then one day it all be reunited. So that whole metaphysics of the afterlife is very different. So we have to do a comparative theology and comparative philosophy and metaphysics. You really have to understand all these details and the ramifications of these differences, why we cremate and the Abrahamic religions bury. The nature of the body itself is very different. The nature of the afterlife is very different. The nature of the sin versus karma, sanskar, phala is very different. So I would say that this honest dialogue needs to start in some universities, and maybe we would love you to start it, and such that good, genuine Hindu scholars and thinkers can come and present positions without having to be politically correct, without having to sort of agree just because they are tenure track or looking for a tenure track. This kind of a real dialogue has not started. Because in interfaith dialogue, what happens is Hindus are represented by people who really want to be in the good books, so they're invited back, and they will not say anything inconvenient. And in the academic sense, when there's comparative stuff going on, they avoid the real tough issues. So the issues will require good, hard conversations and dialogues by open-minded people, and this will need many, many years, many rounds of conversation, and this will result in proposals for serious reformation. And until we do that, we're just ignoring the real issues. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Rajiv. We are going to the topic 3 for discussion, and the topic is related to Western scholarship and studies on India, related to India. And often this is agenda-driven. It's sometimes, I would say, very toxic. It divides people in India. It's got a big impact on the Indian political atmosphere. And so we're going to talk about the complications created by Western scholars. Recently, Wendy Doniger also gave gave an interview in NPR probably a couple of days back, in which she said that the Bhagavad Gita is a text which is only for the upper classes, and it's got nothing to do with the Dalits and the women folk, and it cannot be described as a national book of India, as one of the national books of India. So I would request Professor Eberhart to give his views on, since he is also a Western academic scholar, on the same issue. Thank you.
I need to say that I'm not an expert on Hinduism, so I can't really, 2 minutes, I can't really say a whole lot about how this specifically relates to Hinduism. I also don't know much about this current discussion that was referenced just a moment ago. I would like to actually mention something which I think is important for scholars and what we're doing, and I think also what we do as religious people, which hopefully helps to show why I'm interested in a discussion with everybody, Rajiv, everybody here who represents a religion. I was taught very early on, when I was still in my first semesters in my studies of religion, something about the nature of this whole enterprise that I was going to go through. And that is, now humans can talk about God, but what we say about God is never exactly how God is. Okay, we can in the end say that God is a father, or that there are 330 million gods, or a triune God, or whatever. But in the end, all of this language will only help to approach God. It will never fully capture God. Okay, now I'm standing here decades later. I'm a professor of religious studies. I have 2 doctorates in biblical studies. You know what? I still don't know exactly how God looks like. You can study, I promise you, all your life. You can read many sacred scriptures, but in the end, you still only approach something which in the end is totally other. Again, in Latin, that's totaliter aliter. God is totally other. And we have to, as humans, acknowledge that. And that's, for me, why I would never make statements about, like, the other tradition totally invalid, or their scriptures totally invalid. I think there's something to be gotten out of it, wherever it is, just for the very reason that these traditions have been read, sometimes not for hundreds, but for thousands of years, and this, of course, applies all the more for Hinduism, the oldest religion which we currently study. There are maybe older ones, but Hinduism is like the oldest tradition which is so widely represented. I would never be able to make such a statement. I'm also very sad that in North America, for instance, Native American traditions have almost disappeared. Unfortunately, there are many efforts to try to revive them, but I think it's very important and very healthy to study them again, especially today as we know that the world is in danger. I think Christians can learn a whole lot from this intimate connection to the earth, which recognize that everything on the earth is living. You know, yes, I mean, Christians don't have that strong of an emphasis on that in their scriptures. So, you know, study Native American traditions and learn from that. I think it's for the benefit of all of us. So I think we can learn from each other, and that's why this dialogue and this curiosity is very, very important.
So since this question has to do with scholars and Wendy Darniger and academics and so on, I would say that I have engaged the Western academic community for 20-25 years, full time. And I know a lot about what the dynamics are, what the politics are. And I must say that there is a kind of a cartel mentality which keeps people like me out. And the scholars are not, the scholars who are on a personal level, on my wavelength, are not willing to fight the good fight against the whole system and say, like, look, let the voices come and represent themselves, and let us not talk about them behind their back on their behalf like good cops. Let them come and speak for themselves. A part of the problem is, what is the definition of a competent scholar is a very Western definition. So you have to have a Western certification that you are a qualified scholar. You have to go through a Western program of higher education and be certified. And that is not how our yogis and acharyas have been certified for thousands of years. So we have to, in order to have a person be qualified in the Western Academy to represent Hinduism, he has to go through a Western system of what amounts to brainwashing. I know a lot of people who are into the training, and they have to study, you know, the certain categories, hermeneutics. Swami, I mean, a sadhu or yogi doesn't know what's meant by hermeneutics. And why is it important to understand, every time we do something from the Hindu point of view, to get a Western publisher, he'll say it has to be peer reviewed by Westerners. The Westerners who peer review reject it because you did not cite Western sources. The moment you cite Western sources, you're back in the game. You've been co-opted. So either you get co-opted into learning the Western categories, the categories of Western universalism, and then you learn the hermeneutics and you learn to think like them, and then you get your certification, and then you can speak for Hinduism because you have a Hindu name, but you've been brainwashed and compromised. Or if you are really truly a practitioner, then you are not allowed to come enter the discourse in the Western Academy because you are not somebody that they have certified. So this is the gatekeeping and kind of a certification system, which is itself a problem in my opinion. We consider a person who is a very highly accomplished yogi to be our exemplar. Sri Aurobindo would never have been allowed to come and teach in the Western Academy his philosophy. Gandhi would not have been allowed, Swami Vivekananda would not be allowed, Raman Maharshi would not be allowed, because they did not have the Western degrees and the Western stamp of what it constitutes to be an academic scholar. So you see, once I was talking to some people in Princeton University, and I said, suppose you have an opening for a professor in Buddhism, and Buddha walked in. What would you do? And they had no hesitation to say, we will reject him. That's true. And I said, what would you do if Jesus Christ walked in, applied for a job on Christianity? They said, we'd have to reject him. Because the university policy doesn't satisfy that. So I think we have a problem of a particular civilization controlling the universalism idea of who constitutes a scholar, what he has to go through, who certifies, who are the peer reviews that approve the journal articles, so that you have to peer-review journal articles so many times before you can get it to the next step. This whole mechanism in the academy is itself something that needs reformation.
You want a rejoinder to that? You can allow a rejoinder, and that's the last one. You want to give a rejoinder to that?
At some point, yes. I mean, you have to agree to certain rules, and in fact, in the academy, that is. Oh, gee, 1 minute. That is, to publish, you have to somewhere find your rules. Let's see what I can where I wanted to go at is actually that I currently have a Buddhist who might in fact be teaching our courses in Buddhism pretty soon, and so I know of a school, I was just informed about that, where the course in Christianity is taught by a Muslim, jointly in rotation taught by a Muslim and a Sikh. Now, Rajiv would, of course, say that they have been brainwashed. I just want to say that that's possible. And I think there's a choice for that because it brings a different perspective on things. I'm curious in diversity and telling the same story differently over again. So, of course, I know on the other hand, Rajiv is right. The university system that we have it wasn't invented globally. I mean, it comes out of Europe. And yes, I mean, there will be this particular smack or smell on it. I don't deny that. I would probably fully agree that people who think differently, who represent a different culture, have maybe at some point at least had a problem. Now, if you're on the job market today, though, there's a strong push for diversity, which means today, if you're actually an Asian scholar, you probably would have more of a chance than me, who is a white male, in the academy. And that's not a joke. This is really something which is true, which I experienced in the last years. I got the job here, but there were places that I know favored people who just look very different from me. And there are many places who look for today for somebody who is an African American or Asian or who is a woman. So the white male is actually not really the strongest category if you want to actually look for a job in my field at least. So changes might be there in the future, and maybe we just have to be more patient with that.
I think that what Professor Eberhart says is a good trend and a solution. I consider it to be exactly the opposite. I think it's a real serious problem, because the issue is not the ethnicity, gender, etc. of an individual, but the way their mind has been programmed with what kind of apps he has to download in order to be that Sikh who teaches Christianity. What kind of teaching does he have to go through? So let me give you a very concrete example. I am right now fighting a battle on the future of Sanskrit with a man called Sheldon Pollock in Columbia University, who is immensely powerful. And the Shringeri Mutt, which is the hub of all our, the center of Advaita, Vedanta, and so on, a person they would consider initiated and a scholar who's done so many years of tapas and who's attained a lot of enlightenment, including the Shankaracharya himself, would not qualify to occupy that chair of Sanskrit because he doesn't fit the requirement. So what you would have to do is, if the Shringeri Mutt wanted to create their people and occupy chairs of Sanskrit in Columbia University, which they want to fund, they would have to send young people through the whole education system, get them a Western orientation. The person will learn hermeneutics, he will learn all these categories, he will learn whatever, all of that stuff. And that filtering process my two kids went through to get their advanced degrees in the humanities. The filtering process is such that no matter how determined you are to not succumb, you will have to succumb to get your degree. And I have a lot of horror stories of Indians and Westerners who are practicing Hindus who have to fight the system in order to get their doctoral dissertation approved. And till the end they were told, this is too much the practitioner's view, it is the emic view, not the ethic view. And this is too much, you haven't cited enough Western sources. And this is based on an experience of a yogi, but we don't consider that. That is not what matters. So you see, what you are doing is completely sidelining the credibility and adhikar of a yogi's experience, because that is not what the Western Academy considers valid and legitimate. You are basically looking at book knowledge. So what you have is the bookworm who can dissect and produce from the text. We are not a text-based, we are an embodied knowing tradition. And since we are embodied knowing, the exemplar is somebody who's embodied. So to give you an analogy so you have some sympathy with me, I would say that some of the saints in Christianity and Jesus Christ himself might not have been into hermeneutics, might not have been the guy who would pass the exam and be able to turn in all the papers and might not be qualified. And so what has happened is the Western academies' teaching of religious studies is not even sincere to Christianity itself, is my view. It is not only a Hindu problem, but the problem that Christianity suffers as a result of it is obviated or relieved or reduced or whatever by the fact that there's a huge number of seminaries that are sympathetic, so they are producing enough discourse. We don't have the Hindu version of seminary that's out there producing a whole lot of output. So if we want to have a seat at the table in academic discourse, we have to go through the regular religious studies route. So actually, I used to be a champion of trying to get positions and chairs in Hinduism studies in the academy. I no longer am, because I think what you're doing is funding the wrong methodology of studying us. It is not the DNA, whether it's an Indian DNA or whether the guy wears a turban or whether he's a Muslim. It is not about that diversity. I'm not talking about diversity of ethnicity. I'm talking about the diversity of the Siddhant, what we call Siddhant, which is what you would call hermeneutics. We have our own equivalent of hermeneutics called Siddhant, the theory of how you see things, the theory of interpretation. We have our own, Sanskrit has its own literary theory, which believes in rasa and all these things which don't even exist in the West. So what we are asked to give up, to even have a voice at the table, is to give up the things that are most central to us, which make us who we are. We have to give that up and assume another aura and another voice and another kind of way of thinking in order to even be having a ticket and a certificate so we can be heard. That to me is a problem that nobody is talking about, because they're saying we'll now have women, we'll have blacks, we have a Sikh guy, we have a guy with with various kinds of clothes, and we have a Swami wearing, we'll have a guy in saffron. But this saffron clothed Swami will have gone through so many years of brainwashing that he will not be able to teach the same way. So to me, it's more the methodology of studying religion itself which has to be debated.
Thank you, Rajiv. And we'll close the debate, the discussion session. We'll have more encounters like this in the future, and we'll request all of you to, when we come next time, when we arrange it next time, to be present in larger numbers and get enriched from both sides and get the whole story. Because if we talk only among ourselves, we become an echo chamber of bias. So that's the reason we brought Professor Eberhart today, and we thank you very much, sir, for being here. And Rajiv, thank you very much for presenting. And we really thank Eberhart on behalf of iHeart and the Hindu community here in Houston to come here and give your views. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah, please.
I want to thank Professor Eberhart because he's very courageous, and I like people who can just talk very honestly and freely. And I thought he was doing a very good job representing Christianity. You know, this is very good. Not in any way sort of hiding the theology and philosophy and history, but being very straight about it. And yet, coming to a forum like this, where it takes a lot of courage, it's a room full of very, charged up Hindus, and so, but
Good cups and bad cups.
yeah, the good cups and bad cups. But I will say that the exact flip of this, where I am the only Hindu and the whole control is and the audience is Western, I've done for 25 years, and I did not have good moderators who were doing a level playing field. I had to really fight for every word to get in. So I'm very happy that we can have these honest conversations and debates and this is the open architecture of Hinduism at work right here.
Thank you very much.
We will now follow up this interaction with a question and answer session led by Dr. Rajkumar Vedam, the Director of Indian History Awareness and Research.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for your great interest in writing so many questions. I've had a challenge in sorting them and deciding what we are going to read out and what we are not because of the limited time. I'd like to assure each of you that we'll try to address the questions by my requesting both of our speakers today. If you will take the time offline to respond to the questions by email, so we'll make it available by our website later. So today we'll take some questions. My suggestion is each question we answer for 2 minutes. I've already sorted them, so I know who I'd like to address the questions to. Just take 2 minutes for each question. I know that the moderator said 15 minutes. Can we have 20 minutes? I've got 5 questions each. Okay. All right. So I have the first question for Sri Rajiv. This question says, the Europeans not only colonized us, but also rubbed in our contrived inferiority and their superiority. How to erase this from our psyche? How long will it take? What is the modus operandi?
So this is the decolonizing process. It starts when you start becoming self-aware of your own colonization. Before you can decolonize others, you got to decolonize yourself. And so if in being different, I've given a whole lot of ways of decolonizing ourselves by becoming conscious of how we are different, what we are trying to claim, and then from this position, how we look back at reverse the gaze at the colonizing culture. Because this colonizing culture, we have to take a look at it objectively, in a rational way, in a logical way. Mike, is this okay? In a logical, rational way. This is the process of decolonization. And then I've gotten specific techniques like claiming Sanskrit non-translatables and not using English equivalents. So Atman is not soul. I've given a whole logic why it's not soul. And why Shakti is not sort of energy like some kind of electric bulb or something like that. And Shakti is a whole lot more. So this secularization and digestion of our terminology, there are certain words which are so special in a tradition that experience didn't happen in another tradition, so they don't have a word for it. Like yoga, yoga is not exercise or gymnastics or prayer or something like that. So the Sanskrit non-translatables is one technique everybody can use. And knowing the differences, like the difference between the karma reincarnation theory versus the original sin theory, or what you may say the Hindu good news versus the Christian good news, is that these are kind of techniques you have to learn and start articulating, start practicing, start challenging. The place to start is your own Hindu friends. They are the ones who are the most confused. And once you do that and others catch on, they will also begin to, by influence, they'll also begin to do this. So that's where I think the decolonization process has to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Rajiv. The next question I have is of Professor Eberhart, and this is by an 11-year-old. So please excuse the language or the tone. We all believe in God. So why do we argue about our beliefs? Why can't we all just respect each other? I'm sorry.
Thank you for that question. I think it's a great question. I think that we probably addressed the question already. We gave some answers to this question. I've spent a lot of time thinking of what I could say at the beginning of my talk here, and one thing that I thought I could be saying, which I ended up not saying, as you have witnessed earlier, one thing that I thought I could be saying is, we should in the first place not argue so much about our doctrinal differences, which means kind of how the fine print of Hinduism and Christianity is different. What we should do in the first place is actually always come together and have a celebration with a lot of good food. First of all, I like Indian food, and second, I think actually that's, I know for a fact, for a historical fact, that is that much of Christianity developed this way. Christianity was not an extremely dogmatic religion in the first centuries. People just met and ate 2,000 years ago, and at some point started to talk about things, and that's how Christianity worked. I think actually, that's my personal point of view, that we spend way too much time debating, like as if we were enemies, instead of first trying to reach out and encounter each other on a very different level. Later on we can still debate things, but maybe then the debate also looks quite different. It probably is.
Thank you, Professor Eberhart. Next question for Sri Rajiv. You already addressed this, but I think there's one more angle to this question. You have been critical of initiatives like DCF and Sringeri Foundation to set up academic chairs in Western universities. What is the rationale? Should we distrust the Western academia? Can we do business with them at all?
No, in fact, I have some video clips where I gave much longer answers. I don't have a problem with the principle. I think you must do due diligence before you invest in a chair, otherwise you make a fool of yourself. And the problem is neither DCF nor Sringeri Mutt nor many of these others have the wherewithal to be able to do an evaluation. They haven't read, I have read thousands of pages of Pollock, and I'm going to write a huge book. Nobody has written an analysis and a critique from our tradition's point of view against with respect to a scholar who's been so voluminous and so influential. Similarly, when I started Wendy Doniger analyzing soup to nuts, I was the only person who ever done it from a Hindu point of view. Nobody had written about this before. So it's a laziness of our people. It's jumping. It's basically going because of appearances, because they are nice guys and they look after you and you become important. It's the wrong methodology to go and fund some chair. DCF has no credentials, qualifications, experience. I've talked to every one of them, every one of those principals. They know me for many, many years. They acknowledge that I've inspired them to start doing this in the first place. They first started out wanting to help me to do this. But they have not invested the quality time nor gone out and looked for experts to help them do the due diligence and the evaluation. So the funds and the donations end up going to people that they have not even checked out. So unless they have enough knowledge about how a particular scholar has been studying our tradition, not just politeness and a few good words he said to a talk like this, but unless we have full expertise in reviewing a particular scholar, we should not take the risk of funding. So the solution is have due diligence teams. I have a due diligence team. I am working with several scholars on Pollock, just one man. It takes me 1 year to do a complete soup to nut analysis and produce a 300, 400 page book on what is what about that one scholar. It takes a lot of effort to do Purva Paksha. This is our tradition of Purva Paksha. So DCF has not done Purva Paksha of Western academic scholars, and Sringeri Mutt has not done Purva Paksha of Western academic scholars. Sringeri Mutt, I must say in their favor, when I used the word Purva Paksha, they immediately caught on what I was saying. I was saying your founder Adi Shankara is known for Purva Paksha and giving the Uttar. Now that was people who were the opponents at that time. Today you should do Purva Paksha of Islam, of Christianity, of Judaism, of Marxism, of secularism. Have you done it? And if you haven't done it, then you are just walking into those institutions and handing them $4 million to do a study, to do a chair studying us. Why would you do that? And they got that point.
Thank you, Sri Rajiv. So, once again, I have a question from a curious 14-year-old for Professor Eberhart.
I get all the children here.
Do you believe that creationism, or the belief that the Bible is true, should be taught to kids of the future generation? What kind of repercussions do you think will occur?
Creationism and I have to say that I come from Europe, where these things, from Germany, where these things are not taught in schools. They're considered, that's the religious realm. But at school, actually, I think one teacher at some point said that exists. This seems to be more an issue specific to North America, and back in Europe, people are sometimes a bit surprised to hear that there are schools here which seriously deal with creationism. Now, I was trying to respond to that already earlier. If you read the Bible, the biblical creation stories, as these kind of almost quasi-scientific reports, so then, but the question is, and I summarize what I said earlier, which of the two then? Right? Because there are already two different stories. Now, do you think the people back then who compiled the Bible were that dumb that they didn't notice that there were different stories? I could also go on and say, well, there are 4 different stories of Jesus in the Gospel, in the New Testament, the 4 Gospels. Do you think people who compiled that didn't notice that they were different at some point? There are, of course, commonalities too, but differences are there. So the question of whether the Bible is true is a very odd one for a scholar who reads very precisely what's written in the Bible, and therefore I think, it's kind of a difficult question, but I think at the school, teach that this exists. I don't think that's a viable alternative if we look really for what happened. And I think I gave the answer earlier in my 15 minutes talk to that.
Thank you, Professor Eberhart. Next question to Sri Rajiv. There is so much that needs to be done. You have said it very well on numerous platforms. Can you give in a nutshell a tangible way to initiate a person and sustain this very important tapas, yajna?
Well, the first thing, I believe in only discussing where I have experience. And this morning I gave a whole workshop, but I started by giving what all I have tried, where we succeeded, where we failed. And based on my experience is the only thing I can tell you, so I don't want to have opinions that I cannot substantiate. So my own experience is that the process starts with a personal transformation, an inner transformation, an inner sadhana, which in my case happened with the help of a guru. And this transformation is so then deep and convincing, and so it changes you. Nothing else is as important. You give up other things, you make compromises, sacrifices to do this, and that's what kept me going 20-25 years in this fight in the face of people calling me all kinds of names. Not only the scholars that I was criticizing, but our own people, and saying, oh no, this guy is dangerous or controversial, we don't want to touch him. Nothing affected me because there's an inner transformation, and I'm doing it as my own sadhana, and I'm not doing it for a career, I'm not doing it to impress other people. So I feel that the solid foundation has to be because of a sadhana-based transformation of yourself. Then on top of that, the tapas is you have to do a very intense purv paksha of the dominant worldview in very great details, their thinkers, their leading worldview, their leading theories and siddhantas. You have to do a lot of levels of purva paksha and uttar paksha. And then the third dimension is you have to have combat training. You have to go out into the field and actually try out these arguments. Try them out on people, and you win some, lose some, you come back better informed. It's like, there is no technology or no device that you can keep perfecting without testing, market testing. So every one of these encounters I have or field experiences is my way of improving my arguments. So this is a full-time job, and what you need is a certain cadre of people who are not just doing it as a hobby, and they're not doing it, at very late age after they're retired and maybe they can't learn that much quickly. But you need to fund very young people and make it a lifelong career to do this as their tapas, as their way of life. And this is as important as Acharya who's teaching regular what is Gita all about. This kind of Purva Paksh, Uttar Paksh representing us in the international forums should become a career path. And we, the community, have not done, at least I didn't get any help. We have not realized the importance of this. Writing a check to some university saying you go do it and I'm just a kind of a passive investor is not going to help you at all. You really need to create people who practice this, who live, breathe this kind of tradition, and from that comes the strength to be able to go and represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Rajiv. Next question for Professor Eberhart. If God made man and earth was made for him to exploit, does that justify unbridled exploitation? Is Christianity compatible with environmentalism?
Okay. I think I hinted at that question a moment ago when I said that Christianity, in fact, can learn from other religions. There's certainly a lot of damage that's being done today to the earth, and Christianity. It's difficult to say Christianity because it's the Western industrialized world, and exactly how that's identical with Christianity, I have my doubts. Sometimes we use the word Christianity or Christian for something that isn't really Christian in the first place. There was also a war between Catholics and Protestants in Ireland, but it wasn't really Catholic fighting Protestants, but it was the English fighting the Irish, and they just happened to have typically different denominations, but it sounded like people were fighting each other over their doctrinal views, some being Catholics, some Protestants. No, I mean, it was a political fight. So again, to come back to this question, I think Christians can learn quite a bit from, for instance, indigenous spiritual traditions, which have a very high appreciation of everything that surrounds us, just because it is all considered to be alive. And if something is alive, there's less of a propensity to hurt it or to damage it, to annihilate it. To understand that we're all fully connected to our environment is, I think, a very important thing. And I mean, that change, whatever that produces as change, should start with us. You know, maybe leave your car in the garage a bit more often. Do things at your Hindu temple, which are economical. Or environmentally friendly. I just wrote a research proposal in that direction, so I could actually go on rambling for quite some time. But and then that's a research proposal for how all different religious communities in the Texas area could actually be more environmentally considerate. So not just Christians, but all that are there, because I think we can probably all learn from it. But I also know that some traditions are a bit more advanced on that path, and others aren't. And I know that Christians wouldn't be at the top of this kind of race towards environmental consideration.
Thank you, Professor Eberhart. To Sri Rajiv, every believer takes his religion to be truth. What is wrong if Christians convert others to what they believe to be truth?
Well, because there is a destruction involved. I mean, if you say whatever I believe I have a right to do, then I may be doing all kinds of abuses to somebody because I believe that. The point is, freedom in this country or any country does not give you the right to impinge upon other people's freedom and other people's rights. So when you are saying, if somebody says, a person A says, I'm a Christian, I'm required by my belief to convert you, the point is that the person being converted, who may be poor, who doesn't have the resources, may not be empowered, may not even have enough knowledge to know what he's getting into because he's kind of duped into it. Look at his rights also. So I think it's not good enough that a Christian is asserting his right to convert you. It's like saying, somebody wants to kill you, somebody wants to harm you, somebody wants to steal you. It's his belief, he has the right to do it. You don't have that right. I think I would argue that a Christian should be a better Christian for himself. There's plenty of problems within Christianity, plenty of human rights abuses within Christianity. If Christians feel that India's social problems are the result of Hinduism and the solution is Christianity, they should look at Mexico, which is a Christian country, Philippines, which is a Christian country. They should look at former colonies of Christian nations that are all Christianized now, and see the per capita social abuse there is far, far greater than in India in terms of all the dynamics of abuse and trust. I did a long time ago. I got some interns from Princeton University, and we got statistics from the United Nations and various other sources, and looked at various crime statistics, abuse against women, abuse against children, all kind of statistics from various countries. And we picked India as a sort of representative for Hindus and did a per capita or per million population. And we took Christian countries, which are poor Christian countries. And in fact, not only the poor Christian countries have very bad statistics in this way, but even the rich Christian countries have pretty poor human rights statistics domestically. So you cannot export a solution to cure somebody else that you haven't been able to cure on yourself. So I think there's also a hoax and there's a kind of a fraud in selling a solution to Indians if the solution hasn't worked for 2,000 years to solve the human rights problems within the Christian society. So I think that also has to be done. It's sort of like if a drug manufacturer says, I have the right to sell him something not good for him, I have that right. The point is the Federal Trade Commission will say you don't have that right because it's deceptive. So similarly, if somebody is telling me that you will go to hell and I will, if you come this way, I will go to heaven, unless he can prove it for a fact, he is giving me something which is not fair. I mean, I have rights too. And there is this false advertising going on. And so I can come up with all kinds of counter arguments which say that the Christian does not have the right to use his power, his economic superiority and so on, and really push evangelism in a very strong way.
Thank you, Sri Rajiv.
Can I break our protocol and just add one thing to this? I don't know whether you can believe this, but we are also visited, we at our house, by Christian missionaries who want to convert us to Christianity, of course. And I'm not going to name the denominations who do that, but, they just ring on your door, and then there are nice people, typically two standing there in black suits with a white sign. And, they don't even care who you are. They want to convert you to the Christian God, that I'm a professor of biblical studies, the family of who goes to church and stuff like that, they don't even care about that. And if they hear that, well, that throws them off for a moment, but then they go on, converting me to Christianity. It's a bit strange, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Indeed. Professor Eberhart, the next question is to you. The Bible says worshipping idols is a sin. How can Christians moderate this view in the modern world?
There has always been, of course, in the history of religions, a development, a process going on. So, which means at some point, in fact, you have to say, well, this is a good process and something else was maybe leading astray. We'd be naive if we wouldn't at some point also sort through. But I think we have to be very careful that the idol or the pagan isn't always the other. Because typically what happens is if we're in this kind of thought process or in this kind of thinking system is that always we, whatever I represent, then is considered right. And that's, of course, it's a very simple way to the truth. In fact, I think it's sufficient. So let's be humble in this quest for the truth and invite the others as well. Because, what exactly is an idol? Sometimes images can be helpful if you want to explain complex things, say, to children. Of course we're using images. I'm at the university, I'm the king of the handout, so I like to bring a lot of pictures because I think they convey a lot of things. Now that, of course, idols can also have negative functions or can convey problematic things. That's another issue. So I think I would be very careful with this. Let me also comment on, if 30 seconds are enough for this, sometimes we become, and the term exclusivist has become around, we become quite exclusivist just because of a misunderstanding. Let me tell you one thing. My father is the best father in the world. Okay? My mother is also the best mother in the world. Now, can I say that? And what do I mean with that? It just means that I grew up with my parents and they gave me everything that, or most of what I am today. Okay? That's all that means. Now, did I ever conduct a scientific study into whether your father and your mother, or Rajiv's father and mother, are maybe better or worse parents? No, I didn't. It's just a way of saying that I really appreciate what my parents gave me. But, in terms of religions, we sometimes mistake that. If I were to say Christianity is the best religion in the world, what might I mean with that? It just brought me to something. We should not mistake such a statement and a certain conviction about that to mean that suddenly then Hinduism has to be wrong. Okay, my dad is the best in the world, and hopefully you can say the best about your dad or your mom. We don't have to start fighting over this. In fact, that would be almost naive or silly. So I think, everybody has the right to have a certain pride about his or her tradition, just as about their family, and I hope we have. If one tradition has damaged the pride of somebody else, I think we owe an apology.
Thank you very much, Sri Rajiv Malhotra and Professor Christian Eberhart for the Q&A session. Thank you.
I thank Sri Rajiv Malhotra, Professor Christian Eberhart, and Dr. Rajkumar Vedam for this lively question and answer session. I that Sri Rajiv Malhotra's books are available outside, and he would be happy to autograph them and sign them for all those who would like to purchase the books today and give it out to you. So, Dr. Rajkumar Srinivasan.
I think by now you have an idea of what our organization is about, at least the Indian History Awareness and Research. So these are some of the dilemmas that we are grappling with. We scream at each other. We have like Rajiv said, we have a pride that's hiding, but we want the hiding to come out, and in a healthy way. We also have a shame thanks to the colonization. So there's a clash there, and we want to grow out of all of that in a very thoughtful way. And so that's exactly what we're doing at Indian History Awareness and Research. So we are a small group. We like to grow. We want people who have a passion. I'll give you some ideas of what we've done recently. We've translated 2 of Rajiv Malhotra's books. If you're not aware of his books, 2 of his books are, one is the book called Breaking India, and the other is Being Different. Both of these were translated to Kannada by our group. It was led by Dr. Bharat Srinivasan, whom you saw here moderating the debate. That's an example. Then we said, one of these meetings, we looked around and said, you know what, we talk so much about how India is portrayed in these textbooks, for example, high school textbooks, but have you read any high school textbook? We've heard third hand, we heard from HAF, we've heard from Rajiv Malhotra, we've heard from so many places. So we actually said, let's look up a textbook. We took a KT ISD history textbook, and we started looking at it. We read it, and we found out what exactly it was saying. For example, there was in center page when the Hinduism was talked about, it said in bold letters, inequality as the norm of Hindu society. That was the heading. Imagine my daughter going to school, 9th grade or 10th grade, and how would she feel when she's taught that and her friends are taught that, and she comes home. So it was a good experience for us, right? For some of you, maybe not. For me, it is. For our team, it was. We wanted to do some homework. Rajiv talks about doing the hard work, right? Full-time work is what it takes. And so, we are all engineers and doctors, but we have a fire in our belly, and so that's what we try to do here. We also participated recently. The Texas Education Agency recently announced that they were coming up with about a dozen textbooks next year, 2015, and so they wanted public comments. And so HAF told us, we worked with HAF on that, they told us this was coming out, so we independently said, okay, let's critique the books. So 6 of us critiqued 5 books, and we sent in our about 100 comments or so. So we are just beginning to review those comments, and it's amazing. We told them there was a narrative about Aryan invasion theory. Between 600 BCE and 1500 BCE, there was Aryans came from the Central Asia to the Indus Valley, etc., etc. And we said, we gave a big list, we gave references, and we said, this is hotly debated. There's no proof for this. And the response they gave was, we agree with the commentators' views, and we're going to add the line that this issue is being debated by scholars. Okay, it's not full victory, but at least, it's a great accomplishment for us. We feel good. It's a big boost for all of us. So that's an example. We're looking at various other narratives like polytheism, salvation, sati. We had a program on sati just about 3 months ago. How many of you attended that program? Yeah, many of you did. So we looked at it. We studied P.V. Kane's book. P.V. Kane is a Bharat Ratna awardee of 1963, I think. And he has written a very good volume, many volumes on Introduction to Dharma Shastras. So we studied that and tried to do some objective research. So those are some examples. I don't want to go on, but we have many other ideas. I think so. The registration package you got lists some of our ideas for the future, for at least for the next 18 months or so. And we like to think that the past is our present to the future. That's how we like to see our organization as. And so we need your support. There is no organization out there. The US government is not going to support us. There's no organization that's going to support us. It's people like you who have, kind of given up the hours of your time this weekend to come here. And so we're looking for you to support us. Give us $500, give us $1,000, give us $5,000, or give us any amount that is you feel you're comfortable with. And if you're giving that other amount, let that be a significant other. That's what I like to leave you with. And so I appreciate your coming here today. And please feel free to talk to us. If you have any questions, we'll be, of course, available. And we're going to be honoring the guest today. And let's do that. And could Mr. Rajiv Malhotra please come forward and accept a simple token of appreciation? We are giving him a book written by Swami Dayananda Saraswati ji, and the title of the book is called Sri Rudram, where Swamiji explains that treatise. This is Swamiji's book. It's called Introduction to Vedanta, Understanding the Fundamental Problem. I hope, Professor Eberhart, you would enjoy reading that book. We'll be happy to have your feedback. Do you want to say a few words? Okay.